Okay, you guys, I have to tell you about the very best thing I found this week, and I'm actually a little bit annoyed that it took me this long to discover it. In 1591, a Cambridge-educated writer named Robert Greene published a pamphlet called A Notable Discovery of Cozenage. Cozenage means trickery. And what Greene did in this pamphlet and in the 5 that followed it over the next year was expose in painstaking, gleeful detail exactly how London's professional con artists operated. He named their roles, described their techniques. He basically wrote the world's first true crime series, except he was also personally acquainted with most of the criminals, which we will absolutely get to. Today, we're spending 24 hours with one of these con artists. In the language of the day, he is called a cony-catcher. Now, a cony is a rabbit, domesticated, bred for the table, easy prey. The cony-catchers were the gangs of scamsters who preyed on similarly vulnerable human targets in the streets of London. Con artists, if you will, in today's language. And if you think this sounds quaint and small scale, I want you to hold on to that thought, because by the end of this episode, you are going to recognize every single trick that these people used. They have not gone anywhere. They just traded the streets of Elizabethan London for your email inbox. Hey friends, welcome back to the Renaissance English History Podcast. If you're new here, I'm Heather, and this podcast channel is where we spend time with the people that history often forgot or decided not to mention or actively judged. So subscribe to come hang out. We do this a lot. Now, let's start at the beginning of our guy's day. It's 1591, it's morning. Our cony-catcher wakes up in Southwark, just across the Thames from the city of London proper. Southwark and areas like it were known as places where those on the run from the law could find refuge. These were the liberties, that was the term, areas that were outside the formal jurisdiction of the city, which is why the theaters and the bear baiting rings and the brothels were all down here. The law had a harder time reaching into the liberties, and everybody knew it. So our guy, he is not sleeping in a ditch. I want to be clear about that. The cony-catchers were appareled like honest civil gentlemen or good fellows with a smooth face as if butter would not melt in their mouths. He had decent clothes. He's clean. He looks like a respectable tradesman or a minor gentleman, which is exactly the point, my friend. He goes to work the way anybody goes to work. He has a routine. He has colleagues. He has a professional hierarchy with actual job titles, which, again, I cannot get over. There are 3 roles in a standard cony-catching operation. Greene wrote, there are requisite effectually to act the art of cony-catching 3 several parties. There's the setter, the verser, and the barnacle. Now, the setter is the spotter and the first contact. The verser is the one who runs the actual con once the target is identified. And then the barnacle is a plant, a fake third party who shows up later to make the whole thing look, legitimate. So today, our guy is a setter. He is the one who finds the rabbit. Where does he go hunting? Well, Greene says, after dinner, when the clients come from Westminster Hall and are at leisure to walk up and down Paul's, Fleet Street, Holborn, the Strand, these cozening companions attend only to spy out a prey. So Paul's here means the churchyard of St. Paul's Cathedral, which in this period was a public square, also a shopping mall, also a news exchange, all in one place. People came from all over England to London for court business, market days, and legal matters. And when they arrived, they were walking around in unfamiliar streets with money jingling around in their pockets and no idea who anybody was. So our setter is looking for one specific type of person. As soon as they see a plain country fellow, well and cleanly apparelled, In a coat of homespun russet and a side pouch at his side, he says, "There is a coney. The side pouch is the giveaway. That's where he keeps his money. And the homespun coat means he's from the country. So he is in London for a reason, probably legal business at Westminster, which means that he came with money. He is, as far as the setter is concerned, a rabbit who just walked into the open." Now it's time for the approach. What happens next is so smooth, it makes me a little uncomfortable because, you've kind of seen exact versions of this exact sequence, probably in your lifetime, in my lifetime. Setter walks up to the man. He's friendly. He's warm. There's no rush. "Sir, God save you. You are welcome in London." He starts asking questions, casual ones. So where are you from? "Do you know so-and-so from your country?" "Oh, I know him. Yeah, I know so-and-so. Oh, you don't know him? Oh, well, what brings you to town?" "Oh, he's building a picture. He wants to know the man's name, his parish, who his neighbors are." Once he has enough, he apologizes charmingly. "Something came up. He has to go. So sorry to have kept you. Thanks for the chat." And off he goes. So then he finds the verser and he tells him everything that he learned. Now, here's where it gets almost theatrical in its elegance. The verser crosses the street, meets the man full in the face, and accosts him. "What, Goodman Barton? How fare all our friends about you? Why, I am such a man's kinsman, your neighbor, not far off." The target's name, his parish, the name of one of his actual neighbors. The verser appears to already know him. The poor man is confused, but also flattered. "Of course. Oh, yes. Hello. I didn't quite recognize you." And now they're friends. The verser will insist on buying a drink. So they go to the tavern. It's just going to be a quick one, just catching up with their neighbor. They end up in the tavern. They're sitting together. They're getting comfortable. The verser, super charming. He shows the man a card trick, something clever, a little sleight of hand. "Here, let me show you how it's done." The man is delighted. "Oh, thank you for this trick," saith the coney. "I'll domineer with this amongst my neighbors." He's going to go home and show everybody he loves this. And then the door opens. Now this is where the barnacle comes in. He thrusts open the door, looking into the room where they are, and as one bashful steppeth back again and saith, "I cry you mercy, gentlemen. I thought a friend of mine had been here. Pardon my boldness." The verser waves him in warmly. "Oh, come, have a drink, friend. Join us." The barnacle sits down, notices the cards. "Oh, are you playing? Oh, I don't want to intrude." "Well, okay, if you insist. Oh, just for a minute. I need to go meet my friend." And now there are 3 men at the table. 2 of them are running a coordinated con, and one of them has 0 ideas. Now, before we go any further, a quick word. I want to pause here for 1 second because I'm in the middle of something I'm really excited to tell you about. Every year since 2016, I have made the Tudor planner. This is the 2026 one. It is a physical planner for productivity nerds, planning nerds who also love Tudor history. It's full of Tudor history. There's like This Week in Tudor History with all your planning tools, habit trackers, notes, all that. There's feast days, there's anniversaries, there's quotes from Tudor people that we care about. This is the 10th year I've done it, and every year around this time of year, I do a crowdfunder to get the funds to pay the printer and also get a sense of how many people are interested in buying it and committing. And so it's kind of like a pre-order. So you pre-order and you participate in the crowdfunder and you get a discount, you get some other cool perks, and it's actually like a whole thing. It's super fun. This year's campaign is called Onward because honestly, that's the energy we all need right now, or at least I need. I don't know about you, but I do. So the 2027 campaign is live now. All of the backers get the planner at a discount, but there are also, because it's a whole campaign, it's the whole thing, we've got perks. There are levels at which you get a TudorCon ticket, or you get a piece of merch from the Onward collection that I've done to accompany the planner, the campaign this year. All kinds of cool stuff. So if you have wanted to back the planner before and you never got around to it, this is the year. If you didn't even know, welcome. This is the 2026 Tudor Planner. All of the backers get to vote on the cover and some of the design parts. So this is the 2026 one, and the 2027 one, you will vote on the cover and all of that. So the link is in the description below. And the campaign is only open for a limited amount of time. Once it closes, that's it for the early bird pre-order pricing. They are available in my shop later on in the year, like in December, January, I sell them in my shop, but they're more expensive. You don't get the pre-order discount. You don't get the cool perks and the options for that. So anyway, all right, back to the tavern where things are about to go very badly for one person at that table. So we are now in the middle of a card game. Now, Greene in his pamphlet describes in impressive technical detail what happens next. The barnacle, knowing the game best, wins strategically. He wins a little, he loses a little. The verser wins some too. The cony's doing fine. Everything feels fair. The stakes go up a little, then a little more. The cony's winning sometimes, which is how you keep a person at the table. And then the trap closes. The barnacle starts to win everything. The marked cards come out, or the false shuffle, or whatever technique they're using that day. The cony loses his money. Then he borrows against what he's sure he's about to win back, and he loses that. There are documented cases where men lost their horses, their clothes, everything they brought with them to London. Greene himself noted in his preface that the cony-catchers had threatened to cut off his hand if he persisted in exposing their methods. They did not love the publicity. Now, there's actually a whole criminal vocabulary, and this is a part that, I can't stop thinking about. These people had their own secret language. Greene included a glossary. Whole categories of crime had their own names. There were nips, who were cut purses, foists, who were pickpockets, crossbiters, who were men that extorted money from a prostitute's clients by pretending to be her husband. There were lifts, who were shoplifters, priggers, who were horse thieves, and corbers, thieves who dragged goods out through windows with a long hooked pole. There's a whole professional title for someone who uses a long hooked pole to drag things out of window mostly at night. Someone was out there methodically fishing valuables out of windows with a hook, and they had a job name. Figging law meant pickpocketing, nipping a bung meant cutting a purse, and the operation that we've been watching today was called Barnard's Law, named after the barnacle character who bursts through the door. They named their con after a job title. There was enough professional pride here to brand it. Now, why was London in 1591 a paradise for the cony-catcher? London's population grew from about 50,000 at the end of the 15th century to an estimated 200,000 by 1603, which is a fourfold increase in a century. The city was absolutely overwhelmed with people who had arrived from somewhere else, from the countryside, from other countries, from Ireland, people who did not know the streets, did not know who to trust, did not have those London instincts that told you to walk faster when someone was too friendly. The cony-catchers were essentially monetizing the gap between city sophistication and rural trust. Every single person who arrived in London from a village was a potential mark because they had been raised in communities where knowing your neighbor was the basis of all social interaction. Somebody who knew your name and your parish and your neighbor's name was definitely somebody that you could always trust. Except in London, they might be someone who paid a setter to learn all of that in a 10-minute conversation an hour ago. So I've been citing Robert Greene throughout this video as if he's the reliable source, and I owe you a brief pause here. Robert Greene was a Cambridge-educated dramatist, poet, pamphleteer, and by most accounts, a spectacular disaster of a human being. He married a Lincolnshire gentleman's daughter around 1585. He spent every penny of her dowry, had a child with her, and then left. He moved to London and spent years writing and also drinking and also associating very closely with the criminal world that he was supposedly exposing. Greene once hired a man known as Cutting Ball, a notorious cut purse, as his personal bodyguard. Cutting Ball's sister Emma was Greene's mistress, and she cared for him on his deathbed. She had a son by Greene, whom Greene named Fortunatus. The irony of naming your illegitimate child Fortunatus while dying broke is something that I will continue to carry with me. In August of 1592, Greene fell ill after a dinner of pickled herrings and Rhenish wine. He died on the 3rd of September at a shoemaker's house, having borrowed £10 from his host that he could not repay. His last act was to write a letter to the wife that he had abandoned years earlier, asking her to settle his debt. So, when you read Robert Greene's pamphlets describing the tricks of London's criminals, know that you are reading a man who personally knew these people, hired one as his bodyguard, had a child with another one's sister, was writing exposés of their methods, partly because he needed the money and partly maybe because he genuinely wanted people to know. He is not like a detached journalist who went undercover to figure all of this out. No. He is part of the story, which honestly makes the pamphlets even better. Now, there's one more detail that I think you'll love. The pamphlets were wildly popular. They sold super fast. People loved them. The cony-catchers themselves, the actual professional criminals that Greene was exposing, complained about it publicly. There survives a pamphlet called The Defense of Cony-Catching, written supposedly by a criminal named Cuthbert Cony-catcher, who argued that Greene was ruining everything by educating the public. How dare he? Cuthbert also pointed out, in tones of actual genuine contempt, that Greene was focusing on small-time card sharping, while far larger crimes like usury and broker fraud went entirely unpunished, which, actually a pretty fair point. The cony-catchers at least only robbed one person at a time. But the broader picture here is the criminals read the exposés written about them. They responded in print. They had opinions about the quality of the journalism. They felt that they had been misrepresented. The Tudor criminal underworld had a PR problem, and they knew it. So what happened to these cony-catchers? Well, some were hanged. Cutting Ball himself ended up at Tyburn. Many just kept going, adapting, moving to new areas when one got too hot. The techniques that Greene described in 1591 didn't disappear. They evolved. The fake emergency, the planted stranger, the escalating game where you keep winning just enough to stay at the table. You have seen all of these. Every phone scam that starts with someone acting like they already know you is Barnard's Law. Every investment scheme where early returns keep you committed is the barnacle walking through the door. None of this is new. The rabbit just changed shape. So we will leave it there. Let me know, my friend, what you think about the cony-catcher. Have you ever been a coney and been caught in a net like this? I know people that have. And I almost got caught once. It was so good. It was such a good one. It was one of those IRS ones. Oh man. And it caught me because I had hired somebody different to do my taxes that year. And so it was really good timing. And then I was like, well, hang on, the IRS doesn't want paid in a gift card. So they almost got me. Anyway, let me know in the comments your thoughts about coney catching and general scams. I love those YouTube channels where the guys record the scam artists and keep them on the phone, and then they'll I don't know, kind of the sting operations. And didn't Mark Roper, I think it was Mark Roper, did a thing where they actually got some of those phone scam places and scammed them back. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Anyway, super good stuff. If you want more Tudor history like this, go ahead and hit subscribe. I do this most days of the week. I love having you here. If you enjoyed the video, I sure would appreciate to press that like button. You know what it does? It feeds the algorithm and gets our content to even more people. If you enjoy these kind of deep dives into everyday people, we did 24 hours in the life of a yeoman farmer recently. You can check that out here, or here's a video that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thank you for being here, my friend. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I share the planet with you. You make the world a better place. And I'm so grateful we got to talk about Tudor scams today. I'll be back very soon. In the meantime, don't forget to drink your water and don't forget the Tudor planner. All right. Bye-bye, friend.